Okay, we'll call this meeting to order. And we're going to, if there's not any public comment on our closed session, we're going to adjourn to closed session. Seeing no public comment. Session, so please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, roll call. Guy Garcia and Catlin O'Halloran are absent today. Notice to the public. Any member of the public wishing to address the governing board on a topic within the subject matter jurisdiction of the district, but not on the agenda, may do so during the public comment period identified in this agenda. By law, subjects not on the agenda cannot be acted upon the board except to briefly respond, clarify, or refer to staff for review and presentation at a future meeting. The board president will recognize you for public comment on the matters on the agenda at the appropriate time. Correspondence?
None.
How about consent agenda?
None.
Are there any public comments at this time? We do have some public. Thanks for being here. Okay, guests and presentations.
This is Scott German with Factor and Company. He did the audits.
Hello, how are you folks tonight?
Good, thanks for being here.
Okay, just have that's louder than I thought. Just have a quick presentation and then I can take any questions that you have. Our contract was for a 3-year period to get you folks to start the process of getting you caught up. We did 12, 13, and 14. Part of the audit is to explain to everybody what an audit is really about. The qualitative aspects of accounting and auditing are management is responsible for the financial statements. So when you look at the financial statements, everything in there except for the 2 pages that have our opinion on them, everything else is your folks. Estimates are integral to these. In your financials, there's not many estimates. You have depreciation on the fixed assets, pension, and vacation, which is a little tiny. Other required communications are, did we have any difficulties encountered? Boy, this thing is touchy. Biggest difficulty we had was finding documents. These poor folks had an archaeological expedition to go through in order to get them. They worked very hard to get them, and even as hard as they worked, we couldn't get everything. They came in, 3 years after the first year that we were doing, so they were looking back just like we were, so they couldn't answer a lot of the questions we had. And I'm going to point that out several times. A lot of what's in here is aimed at the people that were here then, not them. Corrected and uncorrected misstatements. There was no uncorrected. We cleaned up everything. The biggest adjustment we had, which is about $960,000, was the write-off of the construction in progress. When we got here in 2012 was the first year we looked at, and that's the year that we did this. There was work done on building a new library building for years before that, including plans which, by the time we got here in 2016, were probably going to have to be redone anyway because of just passage of time. Therefore, we didn't think that there was any value in those, and because there is not currently plans to move forward, all of that got written off. There were several smaller accounts that the county had on the books that nobody knew what they were for, so we cleaned all that up. Disagreements with management, none that I'm aware of. Consultations with other accountants. This is a case where if we propose something, management sometimes will go out and ask questions of other accountants to see if we're just crazy. As far as I know, there were no other consultations. Other findings and issues, there's several that we'll discuss later, and as I said previously, these are related entirely to management that was in place at the time. Other matters, none other matters. So the opinion that we gave on the financial statements is a disclaimer of opinion, and the reason for that is the biggest number on the financial statements is the fixed assets. We couldn't get comfortable that we had a good, accurate detail of what the library owned. So what we wanted to do is have management go through and do a complete inventory and revalue the assets to make sure that what was on the books is real. They were buried trying to make sure that the library stayed open, so they couldn't get to it. We needed to move on, so that's the reason for the disclaimer. It's a project that over time I think you should complete, but for right now, I will tell you that there are several other districts that we do, and we do about 120, that are disclaimed for fixed assets because it's an item that many smaller districts don't care about.
So as far as the assets, you're talking about stuff inside the library, such
Yes.
as desks, computers?
Yes, tables, computers. What started me on this process was I took the listing that was presented to me and went to the library and walked around. And the computers that were on the inventory, I think were IBM, and what was sitting there was Dell or vice versa. So I'm looking at these going, well,
Yeah.
the age of them makes sense that they were probably replaced once, so I just couldn't get comfortable that the numbers were correct.
But it's actually all that type of property you're talking about?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
In 2012, like I said, we removed the construction in progress. That's a big number. Realistically, there was no value to that number. And there was a lot of stuff that I could see in there that I was wondering why it was even capitalized to begin with. So the combination of the two were such that getting rid of it and giving you guys a clean start was the smartest idea. If you want to correct the disclaimer, I would get a good, clean inventory of the fixed assets that's auditable, and that'll fix the problem. Management's discussion analysis. This is a required part of the financial statements, but it's not one of the basic financial statements. So as a result, we're able to not disclaim on that, but just say, they didn't include it, we're okay with it, and move on. It is required, but it's not basic, so it's one of those oddities of the audit standards. This is prepared by the district staff, and it provides an overview of the operations. It's your opportunity to tell the story of what the district is doing and where they're going. The financial statements that we did present were the government-wide financial statements, and what these are the most like the financial statements that you would see from any corporation. The statement of net position is your assets, cash, accounts receivable, fixed assets, liabilities, accounts payable, debt, anything long-term. So virtually the whole government shown in one place. Statement of activities is the whole government's activities shown on an accrual basis, taking into consideration all long-term activities. So the other statements that you'll have are the government fund statements, which you folks have a general fund and the special revenue fund. Balance sheet, so there's a balance sheet for both of those funds added together to get to the total. Statement of revenues, expenditures, changes in fund balance just basically shows you all the revenues, expenses in a slightly different format than is presented in the statement of activities. When you look, the numbers are very similar. Revenues were identical. Expenses were pretty close, except for some little adjustments for depreciation and whatnot. And then there's a reconciliation that takes you between the two and shows you what the differences are. Government-wide statements, like I said, are presented on a statement on a basis similar to for-profit companies. Statement in position takes into consideration all assets and liabilities, long-term, short-term, and everything's mushed into one column so that you're only looking at the entire government at one time. The main difference between the two is fixed assets, in your case. If you had debt, that would also be a big difference. If you had a large vacation accrual, that'd be a difference. Accounts payable, because they're paid relatively quickly, that's the same number on both of them. So therefore, the change in expenses is almost nothing. On the government-wide statements, we have depreciation. On the fund statements, if you bought $1 million of a building, we'd have $1 million of expense. Because it looks at, it's more like you budget on the government fund statements, okay? Statement of activity, like I said, this includes depreciation expense because it's taking that long-term asset and allocating it over its life. Includes interest but not principal, and does not include asset purchases as an expense. Government fund is current assets and liabilities. Separates out funds, general, special revenue fund, which is primarily the library assessment, and excludes all long-term items. Next year, just warning you, you will implement GASB 68. That will result in a large liability being placed on your books. I don't know what that number is because I didn't calculate it. But a rough guess would probably be $300,000 to $500,000.
What exactly is that?
That's your pension liability. GASB has come out and said that we would like the governments to start recognizing that they owe today for promises made, primarily the pension expense and pension liability. We were talking about it earlier, and well, the number that hits your books is going to be large. There's going to be a disclosure that will show you the impact of changing the discount rate by 1%. When you get that report, look at that number. That one will scare you. If you take, for sake of argument, if you have a $500,000 liability, you reduce the discount rate by a percentage, that can go up to $800,000. If this liability that you put on your books will be, say 500,000. If you go to PERS and say, we'd like to get out, they will probably tell you that you owe them $1 million because they use a different discount rate to calculate the current liability than they do in the actuarial reports. So be aware that that number is an actuarial estimate that is subject to a lot of manipulation based on a whole bunch of different factors.
So I'm sorry, just so I understand. Are you saying that that number is not necessarily changing, but next year the rules are changing about putting it on the books?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
So were those not on our books?
No,
now?
up until now, what the statements require that you do is record the payments made, and that was your expense. There was no acknowledgement of the liability that was owed.
Thank you.
The statement of revenue and expenditures and changes in fund balance, this is essentially your budget. This is the one that will most likely be what you see on a regular basis. Treats long-term activity as current expenditures. So if you borrow money, say you borrow $1 million, you'll have $1 million income that year for proceeds from debt. On the government-wide statements, there would be no such revenue. If you paid out principal of $500,000, you'd have an expense on this one of $500,000. On the government-wide statements, you'd have no such expense. Assets purchased are an expense. Principal payments are an expense. Financial highlights. So as you can see, cash, you folks are doing pretty good. And for these 3 years, there was very little activity other than operations. And the combination of that, no large purchases in fixed assets, no planning for the building of a new library, none of that activity. You had lower staff for a period of time. So as a result, your cash position increased. Fixed assets, you know, if you compare the numbers here, that's your balance sheet, right? Those are your total assets right there. The cash and the fixed assets. So as you can see, fixed assets, the number dwarfs the others, so that's why the disclaimer. Revenues, we're seeing a slight increase, which we would anticipate because 2012 was bad years. We're coming out of that. I would expect that for the next 3 or 4 years, you should be doing about the same, same kind of growth pattern. Expenditures, you can see that they've decreased. 14, that would be the year that your new management was here, and they really made sure that everything was running. So your net, you can see that from 2012 at 63,000 all the way up to 14 at 275, which would also more or less tie into the change in cash. The footnotes that accompany the financial statements are essentially more explanation of the numbers. The first few footnotes are related to the district itself and the district's accounting policies. Again, those are policies that you folks set, so I would make sure that I look at those. They're pretty standard. There was no unusual policies, no unusual decisions made by management that raised any red flags. And like I say, it provides additional explanation. So you can see the detail of the changes in fixed assets. You can see the detail and changes in vacation and other long-term liabilities. Findings. Again, said it a couple times, I'm going to say it again. The staff that caused these issues is not the staff you have now. So put that off to the side and remember, don't beat them up. All the findings that we had were addressed in a positive manner, and just looking at the way things were being done currently, we could see that they'd been fixed. One of the recommendations is that the district build reserves. Well, they'd been spending a lot of money on trying to build a new library that was going nowhere, and now you've got an administrator who is looking forward and trying to build the reserves. So I think you've met that. Controls, this is where your staff has made dramatic headway. This is the one that I was most worried about when we got there for 2012, because couldn't find anything, couldn't find approvals, couldn't find anything that said anybody looked at anything. Now I'm confident that they're looking at everything that goes out and they know what is actually happening and they're recording it properly. The response to district management agreed. Most have been corrected as we were working on the issue. It was, we'd point something out, they'd show us, oh, well, here's what we're doing now. The new management team embraces control and accountability. Nothing more can be said about that. And thank you. Any questions?
Yeah, I had a couple questions. I noticed the comment about reserves as well, and I was going to ask you, is there a standard in the industry that we should be looking at to try to have for reserves?
There's as many rules of thumb on that as there are thumbs. So I like to see at least 6 months of basic operations. So if you were getting no revenue and needed to keep the library open a minimum number of days, what would you need? And that's a good place to start. The second component would be long-term, your strategic plan. Are you going to build a new library? Are you going to expand services? Are you going to do certain things? Then you would want to build a reserve to accommodate financing of that activity. whether it be as kind of an endowment or just flat out paying for it.
So I had a question. I know you said a lot of these things have been fixed. The controls and the approval, what's the process now that we have for that? I mean, I know like what the process is for spending over $10,000. It has to come through us. Was that not part of the process during this time? Do you know?
The $10,000, yeah.
It was then too,
that was in
okay.
effect when I
So
started.
that's just what my question is, what are the controls that we have now that are different than what we?
In the 2014 audit, pages 3 and 4, I addressed those.
Okay.
Before you came on, well, there may not have been a director, but things were not getting signed off and approved.
Right.
For payment like you're doing now, as I saw was one of the things.
Yeah, they often weren't filed, they were just kind of tossed into boxes, not everything was approved properly.
Yeah, a lot of the documents, like you said, are just can't be found to
Right.
show what was done. on
Yeah,
it.
and some of the ones that we found were not approved. You couldn't tell who had even authorized the ordering of the supplies or whatever it was.
Okay.
So now you can follow from the time of order, actually, it goes to the budget that you folks approve. That's the first control. If they're not exceeding that budget, then you know that they're doing what they should be doing. Second is the detailed transaction that they take every day on those transactions, and they look at every line of everything going out. So that one's been fixed.
Good, so at this point, for all the audits to go, you can just say, here are all the papers, and they're all filed, and we have all the information we need, right?
I believe so.
Okay. Great,
And
thank
so
you.
it looked like after 2013,
Things
things
got
looked
better.
pretty
Yeah,
good.
yeah. And that was it 2013 that you came on at the end?
2014.
I both started in 2014.
Okay,
Yeah.
yeah. So that's when, 13 was better because most of the old stuff was gone. And 14 got really good at the very end.
Okay.
And what we did is whenever we found an issue that concerned us, prior to their starting, we looked at what was being done now, or at the end of
To
the
make sure
year.
it was corrected?
Yeah.
Okay,
And if there was these we had to include just because we had to include them, but I wanted to make sure that we were pretty clear that it's a problem, but the problem's been fixed. So,
One of the things I noticed was talking about the investments of the district in terms of the assets that we had. And it didn't look like it was a problem, but I noticed that it said something about there are no limitations as to how the things can be invested, but nothing is invested more than 5% in one fund or something. Do most districts have a way where they set policy for safer investing that we should be considering?
your investments go through the county, so it's pooled there.
Okay.
If you were to pull money out, and there are guidelines by which you can do that, maybe you can't. Cemeteries can. If you had investments that you could take out, you would want to have a detailed investment policy that spelled out exactly where, how much, the whole process of where that money could be invested. Right now, your money's in the pool with the rest of the county.
And as long as that's done, it's conservatively and safely invested. Okay.
Unless you're Sacramento County.
that's reassuring.
But just so you know, 2 years ago, my cemeteries received a bill for their interest. Cemeteries have large endowments that just sit there, in excess of $1 million for each of these. They had to pay interest for that money sitting there.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I was just noticing, it said district does not hold any investment in any one issuer at year end that represents 5% of the total investments held by the district. But
Right.
that's actually decided by the county at this
Right.
point?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, anything else?
No, I don't think so. Good, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Scott.
Are there any public comments on this? Okay, so this says it's an action. Do we need to approve or?
That comes up in new business 11A.
Okay, okay, very good. Okay, so moving on to the approval of the resolution to create a library advisory committee. This is, so the resolution's 10.1, and this is for information, discussion, and action.
Actually, we didn't do the director's report yet.
Oh, sorry, right there, I skipped it. Let's do the director's report, sorry.
No, that's okay.
Um,
Everybody should have a copy of this month's budget report.
Okay.
Do you want to make any comments about the audit, Gina? Okay.
Oh, I'd just say thank you for the corrections you've made to record keeping since
Oh,
you've come
you're
on. 'Cause
welcome.
it was pretty clear reading through those audits that it was a little frightening back in 2012.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
thank you.
And
A
to
lot of
both
it
of
was
you,
Gina's
really.
help,
Yes,
So-
very much, thank
She
you.
started before I did.
So just so you know, we do recognize that, that you're working hard on that. Okay, so, the director's report.
Okay. Just a bunch of small things this month. The Friends of the Library book sale is going to be October 19th through the 21st. We'll have over 4,000 books for sale. The ones that don't sell, they'll do a bag sale the next weekend. And the Dixon Historical Society will also be selling books separately from us, but at the same event.
Okay. And do you have a way to keep track of who's is whose?
There's going to be 2 different rooms. So if you buy stuff from the Historical Society, you're in one room. If you buy stuff from the Friends of the Library, you're in another room.
Okay.
We talked about doing it all at once and trying to split it up, but it made more sense to divide it like this, so there aren't any questions about the proceeds. We're gonna have a Halloween booth outside of the library. Like every year, we're gonna have free candy for the kids and information about activities in the library. Next week, we're gonna start doing the annual food for fines. That goes on for 1 month. People can get $1 off fines for canned foods that they bring in, up to a $10 limit off of their fines.
That's great. I won't be in there. I won't tell you what my kids' minds are.
Okay, we talked about updating the policy manual. I have a meeting in Sacramento on the 20th with the consultants where I'm gonna bring the policy manual and talk to them in person about it. Luke had a question last time. They don't currently offer an updating service, but she said she thought that was a really good idea. So they were going to talk about maybe implementing that. We have an annual state report that I have to do that's really time consuming. It's a 6-page report that has all sorts of statistics, our circulation, how many items we get from other libraries, salaries, all that kind of stuff. And we submit it to the California State Library every year, and I completed and submitted that yesterday.
Okay, great.
I corresponded with the Rotary Club. We're trying to arrange a time to meet and talk about possible ways that Rotary could help the library and vice versa.
Very good.
One discussion we had that Melissa and Luke and I had the other day was problems with noise in the children's department and some of the middle school kids using bad language, which was kind of keeping some of the smaller kids and their parents from using the area. So one of the problems that we had was we had 2 IBMs and 2 Macs, and we weren't able to use authentication software on the Macs, which is just another way of saying that people didn't have to put their library card numbers in, so we had no way of tracing who was using the computers. But we're going to put that software in on the PCs, so we'll be able to see who's using things. And we're going to get rid of the 2 Macs and replace them with these AW computers, which are library literacy computers, specifically for little kids, a whole series of games trying to teach them reading and math skills. So we think that that'll help solve some of the noise problem. We may, if the problems persist with the PCs, we may move those two out to the adult section and then get another couple of computers that are directed at older kids for the children's department. The Student Success Initiative that we talked about before, it's the grant-funded program to try and get library cards into the hands of students. We are a pilot library for that. We had the first webinar last week. We have another one next week. Basically, at that webinar, we were assigned a mentor library, which is Woodland. They did it last year. And so far, I'm just getting the different mentor libraries that did it last year are sharing their experiences with us as to what worked and what didn't. One thing that's a little different from what we were talking about before, where we had Jim go out to the elementary schools, this program is to try and get library cards into all students K through 12. So it's a little bit larger focus than what we were trying to do before.
Okay, so I do have a question about that then. So have we been to all the elementary schools now?
Yeah, Jim has. They didn't get a big response at Anderson. There wasn't much of a response from Tremont either, but he's gonna go back to those schools and see what
And
he can
then,
do.
so are we gonna do the same thing for CA in the high school at some point in time?
Probably. I'm not really sure, but part 2 of this, the webinar next week is more how we're gonna implement this.
Okay.
So,
Like CA Jacobs right now currently doesn't even have a functioning library, school library, so that would be a good thing to consider. I know the high school does have a functioning school library, but at least, hope I'm not misspeaking, but at least last checked, have you guys heard about the library, if their library's up and functioning yet?
No,
I know last
in the
year-
works. I don't know if
Okay, I just don't want to misspeak there.
Yeah.
I know last year for sure it was not up and running, and so it is possible that it might be, but if it's not, that would be a good opportunity.
okay. The other thing is, another thing we talked about was an update on the library expansion. I talked with the architect to get an estimate of the cost for the plans and for the possible projects. He said that he thinks the whole rest of the project should take about 2 months before he'll be ready to have conceptual plans and cost estimates for both of the projects we were talking about.
Will you please continue to update us on that?
Yeah, sure. And that's it as far as the library activities go.
Okay, so are there any public comments on the library activities? Have any board comments? Okay. Yeah, go ahead, come on up.
Well, I had something to ask you. What is the benefit for next week for the annual fine of canned food selling, if I'm correct? What is,
Oh, well, we get canned foods, give them to the Solano Food Bank, and people are able to exchange cans that they bring in for a certain amount off their library fees. So if they have fines, they can get up to $10 off of their fines by bringing in 10 food cans.
so basically off the library expansion or something like that?
so if they've not returned books and they've got those kinds of fines, is that what you're talking?
So
Yeah,
it's
if you
fines like
return-
when you don't return the books on time, which happens to my family a lot. It's 10 cents a day, and I think adult books are more. So you wouldn't think that 10 cents a day would be a lot, but if you keep a whole bag of books for a week, it adds up, and so it gives them the opportunity to get that money paid off, because once your amount, and correct me if I'm wrong, gets over $10, you actually can't check out books until you pay your fines.
It's 15, actually.
Okay, it's
but yeah.
15, it's went up.
Yeah.
So,
So I guess my question on that would be, why are we limiting it to $10? I mean, if it's doing a good thing, bringing in canned food and helping the food bank, is there a reason from our perspective that we need to have a limit on it?
I suppose not really. It's just how it's been done in the past.
Yeah.
Well-
I mean, sorry, go ahead.
no. So the one possibility that I would think is, for example, if someone lost a book and they have a big fine, instead of getting that book replaced through their fines, we would maybe incur some cost there. I don't think we incur costs, do we, just from the fines, but if people lost books and that kind of thing and have fines from that way, there might be some
The
loss.
food for fines is only for books that were returned late.
Okay,
If it's materials that are lost, it doesn't go towards
okay,
that.
thank you for clarifying that.
So it gives people a break to do a good thing.
Yeah,
But at the same time, I mean, I don't know how many types of canned food you can find for under $1 these days anyway. So, you know, most of them are not saving a ton of money, right? Unless they have canned food laying around that they don't want.
yeah,
But
that's true.
it's kind of doing a good thing and giving them a break rather than not getting paid.
How much is each can, just for the
It's $1.
$1?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So if you know anyone who has library fines, tell them,
Yeah.
tell them to bring
And
canned
it's
food.
any type of any canned food? Does it matter what it is?
No, I mean, as long as it hasn't expired.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But
Yeah,
you know,
I
you
mean,
got
I,
cream corn sitting in the cupboard that you haven't eaten, you can bring
Yeah.
that down.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know much about politics, but you know, it's nice to know what's going on here in Dixon, California, and all over Solano County. I've been here for 17 years. You know, I don't know everything that goes on. You know, I only know when I see it or when it happens right in front of me, or maybe some rumors that may not be true. But you know, it's nice to know what's going on here. You know, good or bad. Yeah, no other comment. Thank you.
Well, we appreciate you being here and wanting to know what's going on.
Thank
so,
you. And go Rams.
Yes. Okay, any more comments? Okay, so we'll move on. Now we'll go to what I tried to jump ahead to, discussion of the future governance of the library. This is for information, discussion.
I don't have anything to add, just that we had decided last time to keep this as an agenda item.
Okay. Are there any board comments? Any public comments? So just so you know, since you are here, we are working on creating a committee to be able to oversee some of the activities that are going on at the library, like expansion and different things, so they can look into things deeper than we have the ability, and then they can come report to us, so we have some more eyes as to what's going on.
And give recommendations of what things should be done at the library, maybe.
And what the community wants too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so if there's not any more discussion about this item, then we'll move on to approval of the resolution to create, Resolution 10.1, to create a library advisory committee.
The only change on the resolution from last month is that in 2.1, they added, the board may also allow one high school student to serve as an additional member of the library advisory committee.
Okay. And that was a way that we wanted to be able to get high school students involved.
So that would be, since it says additional, that would be one over the original 5 members?
Yes.
Okay. And I'm assuming since we don't set forth in any other way, that person would have, well, to the extent there is any voting on the committee, that student would have a normal vote, the same as all the others.
Yeah, I think that's how we talked about it. working.
Well, I think
What's-
it's more of an advisory, like when we have our student rep here, they get to have a vote, what's it called? When they get a vote, but it doesn't count.
Well, since this is only an
Honorary
advisory.
vote?
An honorary, I mean, if that's one way. And I'm sure that, but,
Well, so the reason why we do that is because the student board member on the school board isn't an elected official, so therefore they can't get a vote, because
Okay.
everyone up here is an elected official, elected by the community, where the actual student board member on the library, or the student committee member, would probably go through the same process as the rest of the committee members went through.
okay.
So I wouldn't see any reason why they wouldn't be allowed to vote.
Because it's not to make a decision anyway.
No,
I
it's
mean,
an
it's just an
advisory.
advisory.
So
Okay.
I don't know how much they'll actually be voting on anything.
Yeah,
But
and I can tell you that a lot of the young kids probably spend a lot more time in the library than some of the other committee members will, so I value
Absolutely.
their input.
Yeah.
yeah,
sounds
and if
very
we
good.
were going to make that position different in any way, we'd need to set it forth in the resolution. And I don't think we have, so I think
Then
that would be interpreted in that way.
they'd be an equal.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so Are there any public comment on this? And any more board comment? Okay, so this is a resolution, so I'll entertain a motion.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, and so this is a roll call,
Aye.
Aye.
and I as well. So the motion, Resolution 10.1 to create a library advisory committee passes. The discussion of the application for the library advisory committee. This is for information, discussion, and action.
So I created a application for appointments for people to fill out. I've worked on a separate sheet that'll just kind of be a brief description of what responsibilities are attached to being on the library advisory committee.
Okay. So are there any board comments about that? How about any public comment? Okay, so I'll entertain a motion to pass this application for appointment to the Library Advisory Committee.
I'll make the motion.
Is there a second? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye as well. The motion passes. Moving on to new business, the approval of the 2012 to 13, 2013 to 14, and 2014-15 audits. This is for information, discussion, and action, and I appreciate all the work that has been done getting this. Hopefully, we can get up to date quickly. Are there any board comments on this?
Just that it looks like you guys have done a good job getting us moving back in the right direction, so thank you.
And we appreciate all the hard work. Any other board comments? Any public comments? Okay, so I'll entertain a motion to approve the audits.
I'll make a motion to approve the audits.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye, and the motion passes. Okay, the approval of the 2016-17 impact fee is for information, discussion, and action.
Yeah, this is the impact fee report we come up with every year, this time of year. We present this to the Solano County Board of Supervisors. Basically, it just takes the final figures from the year-end budget and tells you how much money went into the 428 account for the most part, which is the building and improvements account.
Okay.
Did you have anything you wanted to add? No? Okay.
Okay. Is there any board comments on this? Any public comments? Okay, so I'll entertain a motion to approve the 2016-17 impact fee certification of acceptance.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye as well. Okay, the oral report and action to approve the library director contract. This, I guess, maybe that's what Scott was talking about just stating that it's a 6-month extension. Is there any board comment on this? No? Any public comment? Seeing none? Is there a motion to approve the library director contract?
I'll make a motion.
Is there?
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye as well. Approval of the 2018 library board meeting calendar.
These are all just the second Thursdays of each month as we have been doing it.
Okay,
Perfect. So moved.
okay. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye as well. Approval of minutes for September 14, 2017, regular meeting. Are there any board comments? Any public comments? I'll entertain a motion.
Make a motion.
Is there a second?
So, second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye as well. And I think we don't have any announcements to make. So that will adjourn our meeting.